The shopping cart wheels squeaked against the polished floor as the group of weekend shoppers deliberately blocked the wheelchair-bound woman's path through the grocery store aisles, making loud comments about people who shouldn't shop during busy hours. They thought she was just another burden on their Saturday routine, someone they could push aside and humiliate to make themselves feel superior. The beautiful brunette in the standard black wheelchair sat there calmly, her ocean green eyes showing no frustration despite being trapped between their carts and cruel laughter. They saw inconvenience. They saw someone who didn't belong in their efficient shopping world. They had no idea they were about to face the fury of the United States Navy's finest sailors, and that the small anchor tattoo barely visible on her forearm marked her as one of the fleet's most decorated surface warfare specialists. For more powerful videos about our military heroes, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. Maria Rodriguez, 29 years old, sat quietly in her wheelchair beside the produce section at MegaMart supermarket, watching the Saturday afternoon crowd flow through their weekend shopping routines. Her shoulder-length dark brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her ocean green eyes held a patience that seemed almost unnatural given the chaos surrounding her. She wore a simple navy blue t-shirt and dark jeans, her lean frame still carrying the posture of military discipline despite the standard black wheelchair that had been her reality for the past 22 months. The chair was functional, medical grade, designed for daily navigation rather than athletics, but Maria had learned to move through civilian life with the same efficiency she'd once brought to naval operations. What the busy shoppers rushing past her didn't notice was the small tattoo partially hidden by her sleeve, an anchor with crossed cannons, and the words Surface Warfare Specialist etched in elegant script beneath it. It was faded now, like a memory from another life. But to those who understood naval traditions, it represented years of training that turned ordinary sailors into the backbone of America's fleet operations. Maria had chosen MegaMart for the same reason she chose everything now: strategic convenience. Located near the base housing where many military families shopped, it offered the selection and accessibility she needed for her weekly meal preparation routine. The discipline of organized shopping was something she developed during her Navy years, when port visits required maximum efficiency and minimum time. Every item on her list was categorized, prioritized, and planned with the same attention to detail she'd once applied to radar contact management. The store was supposed to be her sanctuary from the complexities of veteran transition, a place where she could blend into the background of civilian life and complete routine tasks without drawing attention to her service record or current circumstances. She learned to navigate the aisles with military precision, timing her visits to avoid peak crowds and managing her shopping with the same systematic approach she'd once brought to combat information center operations. But today, her carefully planned routine was about to be disrupted by the kind of civilian attitudes that no amount of military training could have prepared her for. The weekend shopping crowd brought out behaviors in people that revealed the worst aspects of American society: impatience, selfishness, and the casual cruelty that civilians inflicted on anyone who disrupted their personal convenience. Maria had dealt with hostile contacts before, but those enemies had been honest about their intentions. These civilian shoppers hid their malice behind smiles and social acceptability, making their harassment more insidious than anything she'd faced in military service. Chapter 2: Weekend Warriors. The first sign of trouble came in the produce section, where Maria was carefully selecting vegetables for the week's meals. Her methodical approach, checking quality, comparing prices, organizing her selections, took a few extra minutes because transferring items from wheelchair height to shopping basket required additional coordination and consideration. That's when she noticed the group of 5 weekend shoppers who had begun to gather around her section of the produce area. They weren't shopping so much as hovering, their body language suggesting impatience and annoyance that radiated outward like a toxic cloud. The leader of the group was Kevin Matthews, a 42-year-old middle management type who treated Saturday errands like military operations that required maximum efficiency without any understanding of actual military precision. His weekend uniform consisted of designer athletic wear that had never seen actual athletics, expensive sunglasses that stayed on indoors, and the kind of entitled attitude that came from a life free of real challenges. Behind him stood his weekend crew, Jennifer Walsh, a suburban mom whose perfectly curated social media life masked a complete inability to handle minor inconveniences. Mike Chen, whose gym membership and protein powder obsession had given him muscles but no actual discipline or character. Sarah Johnson, whose retail therapy sessions were sacred rituals that couldn't be disrupted by slower-moving shoppers. And Dave Wilson, whose weekend routine was planned with military precision but without military values of honor, courage, or commitment to anything beyond his own convenience. They weren't random shoppers who happened to be in the same area. They'd noticed Maria 20 minutes earlier in the parking lot, seen her transfer from car to wheelchair, and had been following her progress through the store with the predatory interest of bullies who'd found what they considered an easy target. Some people shouldn't shop during busy hours, Kevin said loudly enough for Maria to hear, though he pretended to be talking to his companions. His voice carried the particular tone of someone who'd never been challenged by anyone who couldn't be intimidated or dismissed. Maria continued selecting tomatoes, her military training having taught her that responding to minor provocations usually escalated situations unnecessarily. She'd learned patience during long radar watches when maintaining focus and discipline were matters of life and death. These civilians were annoying, but they weren't actual threats. I mean, there are special shopping hours for a reason, Jennifer added, her voice carrying the particular mixture of false concern and genuine disdain that characterized passive-aggressive harassment. Senior hours, handicapped hours. Why do they come during normal people time? The casual cruelty of the comment hit harder than Maria had expected. These people saw her wheelchair and immediately categorized her as something other than normal, someone whose time and needs were less important than their weekend convenience. The dismissive tone suggested they viewed her presence as an imposition on their right to efficient shopping. Chapter 3. Escalating Harassment. What happened next was a masterclass in civilian bullying, disguised as accidental encounters. The 5 shoppers began using their carts as weapons, creating deliberate obstacles to Maria's movement through the store, while maintaining the appearance of normal shopping behavior. In the cereal aisle, Mike positioned his cart to block the accessible space while pretending to study nutrition labels with the intense concentration of someone solving complex mathematical equations. When Maria tried to maneuver around him, he'd shift just enough to force her into awkward positions while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. "Oh, sorry," he'd say with fake concern whenever his positioning created problems for her navigation. "Didn't see you there?" Sarah perfected the art of claiming excessive space in narrow aisles, spreading her shopping across multiple sections while taking deliberate time with decisions that should have been simple. When Maria's presence meant she had to share space or move her cart, she'd sigh dramatically and make comments about some people having all day to shop. Dave specialized in the accidental cart collision, bumping into Maria's wheelchair just hard enough to be noticed while offering apologies that fooled no one who was paying attention. Each collision was followed by exaggerated concern about whether she was okay or needed help, delivered in tones that made it clear he viewed her as broken rather than temporarily inconvenienced. But it was Kevin who coordinated the harassment with the efficiency of someone who'd perfected the art of making others miserable without technically violating any store policies or social norms that might get him in trouble. "Watch out for the speed bump," he announced loudly as they approached Maria in the frozen food section, causing other shoppers to turn and stare at the commotion. His comment was designed to draw attention to Maria's wheelchair while making her the object of public scrutiny. "Maybe she needs help reading the labels," Jennifer added with theatrical concern. "Sometimes these people have reading difficulties too, it's so sad." The implication was clear. They were portraying her disability as comprehensive, suggesting cognitive impairment along with mobility challenges. It was a common tactic used by bullies to dehumanize their targets, reducing complex individuals to simple stereotypes that justified cruel treatment. Maria had dealt with hostile contacts before too, enemy radar signatures, potential threats that required careful assessment and appropriate response. But those enemies had been honest about their intentions, professional in their hostility. These civilians disguised their cruelty behind social conventions and plausible deniability, making their harassment more insidious than direct military conflict. Chapter 4. Systematic Intimidation. The harassment continued through every section of the store, with Kevin's group following Maria's planned shopping route and creating obstacles at each stop. They'd perfected a system of coordination that maximized her discomfort while appearing to be coincidental encounters to casual observers. In the dairy section, they boxed her in with their carts while making loud comments about special parking and handicap discounts, suggesting that she was somehow gaming the system for benefits she didn't deserve. Their conversation was designed to be overheard, creating a narrative that portrayed Maria as a burden on society rather than a contributing member. "I heard they get special government checks just for being in wheelchairs," Sarah said loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Must be nice to get paid for sitting around. Plus all the free parking spaces," Dave added. "Right up front where the rest of us have to walk extra distance. Doesn't seem fair." The comments were designed to build resentment among other shoppers, creating a hostile environment that went beyond their own harassment. They were weaponizing civilian ignorance about disability benefits and veteran compensation, turning Maria's legitimate needs into sources of public resentment. In the household goods aisle, They created deliberate traffic jams by positioning their carts to force Maria into time-consuming navigation challenges. When other shoppers became impatient with the delays, Kevin's group would make sure attention focused on Maria as the source of the problem rather than their own obstructionist behavior. "She's holding up the whole aisle," Mike observed loudly. "Maybe management should do something about this." "There ought to be special shopping times for people who can't keep up with normal pace," Jennifer agreed. "It's not fair to everyone else." By the time Maria reached the personal care section, she was dealing with not just direct harassment from Kevin's group, but suspicious looks from other shoppers who had been influenced by the running commentary about her legitimacy, her benefits, and her impact on their shopping experience. The systematic nature of their harassment revealed planning and coordination that went beyond spontaneous rudeness. They had identified her as a target, developed tactics for making her unwelcome, and were executing a campaign designed to drive her from the store without technically violating any policies that might result in their own ejection. Chapter 5: The Breaking Point. The confrontation reached its climax in the checkout area, where Kevin's group positioned themselves to create maximum disruption to Maria's attempt to complete her shopping. They had spent over an hour following her through the store, and now they were prepared to make her final experience as humiliating as possible. "Express lane is for 10 items or less," Kevin announced loudly, though Maria was clearly in the regular checkout line with a normal week's worth of groceries. His comment was designed to suggest she was either unable to count or unwilling to follow basic store rules. "Maybe she can't read the signs," Sarah whispered, just loud enough to be heard by other customers in line. "Some of these people have multiple issues. Or maybe she thinks the rules don't apply to her," Dave added, his voice carrying the false sympathy that made civilian cruelty more painful than military conflict. Special privileges and all. Maria had been loading her groceries onto the conveyor belt with the systematic efficiency she'd learned during military service when Jennifer accidentally bumped into her wheelchair with enough force to send several items tumbling to the floor. The collision was clearly deliberate, timed to create maximum disruption and embarrassment. "Oops," Jennifer said with theatrical concern that fooled no one paying attention. "I'm so clumsy when I'm in a hurry. You know how it is when normal people have places to be." As Maria bent to retrieve her scattered groceries, Mike kicked one of her canned goods further away, making it impossible for her to reach from her wheelchair. The action was subtle enough to appear accidental to casual observers, but obvious enough to demonstrate his deliberate cruelty. "Here, let me help," he said. But instead of actually assisting, he placed the can just barely out of her reach and walked away, leaving her struggling while other customers watched in uncomfortable silence. The 5 shoppers began laughing as Maria worked to gather her groceries while maintaining her dignity in front of an audience of civilians who seemed more interested in the entertainment than in offering actual assistance. No one intervened. No one offered genuine help. They simply watched as 5 adults systematically humiliated a disabled veteran for their own amusement. That's when Maria made a decision that would transform the entire situation. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she hadn't used in months, but one that represented a connection to a community that understood honor, service, and the obligation to protect those who had already sacrificed for others. Chapter 6: Naval Response Network. Chief Petty Officer Carlos Martinez was conducting weekend liberty briefings for newly arrived sailors at Naval Station Norfolk, just 15 miles from the shopping district where Maria was being systematically harassed. The timing was perfect. 200 Navy personnel were about to be released for 48 hours of shore leave, and Maria knew that many of them would be heading to the same civilian areas where she was currently under attack. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered with the crisp professionalism that never left military communications. "Chief Martinez." "Chief, this is Rodriguez. I apologize for calling during duty hours, but I have a situation that requires assistance." There was a pause, followed by the immediate shift in tone that came from Naval Brotherhood and the recognition that a fellow sailor was requesting help. "Maria, what's wrong? Are you safe?" "I'm at MegaMart on Jefferson Avenue experiencing systematic harassment from a group of civilian shoppers. They've been following me through the store for over an hour, blocking my path with shopping carts, making comments about disabled people shopping during normal hours, and generally conducting a coordinated campaign to make me feel unwelcome and drive me out of the store." The silence on the other end was profound and dangerous. Chief Martinez had served as a surface warfare specialist for 18 years before advancing to Chief Petty Officer. He knew exactly who Maria Rodriguez was, what she'd contributed to fleet operations, and what her service record represented in terms of dedication and sacrifice. "They're systematically harassing you? At a civilian grocery store?" The disbelief in his voice was palpable. "Affirmative, Chief. Classic intimidation pattern. Using shopping carts as obstacles, making loud comments designed to embarrass and isolate me, coordinating their movements to maximize disruption of my shopping routine. They've turned other customers against me by spreading false information about disability benefits and special privileges. Maria, listen carefully. Are you in immediate physical danger? Negative on immediate physical threat. But they've created a hostile environment that's escalating. They're not just harassing me individually. They're building civilian resentment by spreading misinformation about veteran benefits and disability accommodations. It's psychological warfare designed to make me leave voluntarily. Chief Martinez was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of coordinated civilian harassment targeting a decorated veteran. Rodriguez, I want you to maintain your position. Do not let them drive you out of that store. You have every right to shop there with dignity and respect. I'm organizing a response. Chief, I don't want to create an incident. I just want to complete my shopping and go home. Petty Officer Rodriguez, Martinez said, using her full rank to cut through civilian politeness and remind her of military obligations that transcended active duty status. You are one of the finest surface warfare specialists this Navy has ever produced. You've served your country with honor in some of our most challenging operational environments. No civilian has the right to harass you for using mobility equipment, and no American should tolerate systematic intimidation of veterans in public spaces. Chapter 7, Fleet Mobilization. Chief Martinez hung up and immediately began the kind of rapid communication network that made the Navy famous for coordinating complex operations under challenging conditions. Weekend Liberty briefings had just concluded, and 200 sailors were preparing for shore leave with plans that could easily be modified to include a show of support for a shipmate under attack. Within 10 minutes, Martinez had contacted 60 sailors who knew Maria's reputation and service record. Her expertise in radar operations and combat information management, her calm under pressure during Mediterranean deployments, her leadership during complex fleet exercises, every sailor who had served with her understood both her professional competence and her personal character. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Sailors began modifying their weekend plans, coordinating transportation, and organizing the kind of spontaneous fleet response that demonstrated why military service created lifelong bonds of mutual support and protection. They weren't coming as vigilantes seeking confrontation. They were coming as military professionals who understood that harassment of veterans represented an attack on values they had sworn to defend. Their presence would demonstrate the difference between civilian bullying and military professionalism, showing what respect and dignity looked like in practice. At exactly 3:47 p.m., the first group of Navy personnel walked through MegaMart's automatic doors. They wore civilian Liberty attire, polo shirts, khakis, casual button-downs, but their bearing was unmistakably military. They moved with purpose, coordination, and the quiet confidence that came from years of service in challenging environments. Chief Martinez led the advance group, his eyes immediately locating Maria in the checkout area where she was still dealing with harassment from Kevin's group. Behind him came Petty Officer Second Class Jennifer Torres, a radar technician who had learned electronic warfare from Maria during their joint deployment. Petty Officer First Class Robert Kim, a fire control specialist whose expertise had been enhanced by Maria's patient instruction. Seaman Apprentice David Thompson, recent boot camp graduate who already understood the importance of taking care of shipmates, and 57 other Navy personnel who had interrupted their weekend plans to respond to systematic harassment of a respected colleague. The store manager looked up in confusion as uniformed and civilian-dressed military personnel began filling his grocery store in coordinated groups, unsure why so many obviously military customers were suddenly appearing for Saturday afternoon shopping, but recognizing the disciplined movement and professional bearing that distinguished them from typical weekend crowds. Chapter 8. Military Professionalism versus Civilian Harassment. What followed was a demonstration in contrast that would be remembered by everyone present. The 60 Navy personnel didn't march in like an occupying force or create confrontation. They simply began shopping with the kind of coordination, courtesy, and efficiency that highlighted the difference between military discipline and civilian rudeness. Chief Martinez walked directly to Maria's position, taking a supportive stance beside her wheelchair with the natural protectiveness of someone who had served alongside her in operational environments where teamwork meant survival. Rodriguez, he said, using her surname with the military familiarity that conveyed respect and connection. How's your shopping experience today? Getting unnecessarily complicated, Chief, Maria replied, gesturing subtly toward Kevin's group, who were now watching the proceedings with growing unease as they realized their target was no longer isolated and vulnerable. I can see that, Martinez observed, taking in the scattered groceries on the floor, the defensive positioning of shopping carts, and the obvious pattern of systematic harassment that had been ongoing. His trained eye immediately recognized coordinated hostile behavior when he saw it. Petty Officer Torres approached with the efficient helpfulness that characterized military teamwork, offering to assist with Maria's groceries while simultaneously documenting the situation with the methodical attention to detail that Navy personnel brought to problem-solving in complex environments. Other sailors spread throughout the checkout area, not creating confrontation but simply modeling the kind of respectful behavior and mutual assistance that represented military values in civilian settings. Their presence created an immediate contrast with the harassment that Kevin's group had been conducting. But it was Seaman Thompson, the youngest sailor present and newest to fleet operations, who delivered the observation that would resonate most powerfully with civilian witnesses to the confrontation. "Ma'am," he said to Maria, standing at respectful attention despite the civilian environment, "I need to thank you personally. The radar contact management procedures you developed and taught during our workup training saved lives during our last deployment. Your technical expertise and leadership helped our entire division perform at levels that kept our ship and battle group safe in hostile waters." The statement carried across the checkout area like a precision-guided revelation. The civilian shoppers who had been watching Kevin's group harass Maria suddenly understood they weren't observing the bullying of a random disabled person. They were witnessing the systematic harassment of a military professional whose service had protected American interests and saved American lives. Chapter 9. Truth and Professional Standards. Chief Martinez addressed the situation with the calm authority of someone accustomed to maintaining order and solving problems in environments far more challenging than civilian grocery stores. His approach was professional, educational, and designed to demonstrate military values rather than simply intimidate civilian bullies. "Folks," he said to Kevin's group and the gathering crowd of curious shoppers, his voice carrying the kind of respectful authority that commanded attention without creating confrontation, "I think there may be some misunderstanding here about military service, veteran benefits, and the obligations we all share as Americans to treat each other with basic dignity and respect." Kevin tried to recover his earlier confidence, but his voice lacked the swagger he'd displayed when Maria was isolated and vulnerable. "We were just shopping. We have every right to be here and express our opinions about store policies and customer behavior." "Absolutely correct," Martinez agreed, demonstrating the kind of fair-minded approach that distinguished military leadership from civilian bullying. "Everyone has the right to shop here with dignity and respect. That includes Petty Officer Rodriguez, who earned that right through 5 years of dedicated naval service while many of you were pursuing civilian careers and personal interests." The chief gestured toward Maria with obvious respect and professional admiration. "This is one of the finest surface warfare specialists the United States Navy has ever trained. She managed radar systems that tracked air and surface threats across hundreds of miles of ocean. She coordinated defensive operations for entire battle groups during some of our most complex and dangerous deployments. She maintained situational awareness that kept American sailors alive and American interests protected in some of the world's most hostile waters." Other shoppers in the area stopped their own activities to listen, drawn by the unexpected drama and the revelation that their routine weekend errands had become an impromptu lesson in military service and civilian responsibility. 3 years ago," Martinez continued, his voice carrying the weight of personal knowledge and professional respect, "Petty Officer Rodriguez was conducting combat information operations in the Persian Gulf when her battle group came under potential missile threat from hostile forces. She maintained her radar watch for 20 consecutive hours, tracking multiple air and surface contacts while coordinating with Allied vessels to ensure safe passage for civilian shipping through one of the world's most critical maritime choke points." Maria shifted uncomfortably in her wheelchair, unused to public attention and never having sought recognition for operations that she considered routine naval duties, rather than exceptional service worthy of civilian praise. "The operation was completely successful," the chief continued. "No American ships were damaged, no civilian vessels were harmed, and international maritime commerce continued safely through waters that remain dangerous to this day. Petty Officer Rodriguez received multiple commendations for her technical expertise, professional judgment, and calm performance under extreme pressure." He looked directly at Kevin's group, with the kind of measured assessment that military professionals used when evaluating potential threats or problematic situations. "So when you folks decided to systematically harass her for using mobility equipment to block her path with shopping carts, to make loud comments about special people and handicapped hours, to spread misinformation about disability benefits and veteran services, you weren't just being rude to a disabled shopper. You were conducting a coordinated harassment campaign against a decorated naval professional who has contributed more to American security and international stability than most people will contribute in their entire civilian careers." Chapter 10. Accountability and education. The grocery store had become completely quiet except for the background sounds of refrigeration units and distant music. Even the checkout scanners seemed to have paused as civilian shoppers processed the reality of what they had witnessed and failed to address. Jennifer Walsh, who had been making some of the cruelest comments and had deliberately bumped Maria's wheelchair, tried to justify their behavior with the kind of excuse-making that characterized people who'd never been held accountable for their actions. "We didn't know she was military. We thought she was just another person trying to take advantage of special privileges. We were trying to shop efficiently during our limited weekend time." Petty Officer Kim stepped forward, his expertise in weapons systems and combat operations giving him a particular perspective on the relationship between military service and civilian convenience. "Ma'am, with respect, Petty Officer Rodriguez taught me how to operate Aegis combat systems that simultaneously track airborne threats, surface contacts, and subsurface signatures while coordinating defensive responses with multiple naval platforms and allied forces. She can manage threat assessment, resource allocation, and tactical decision-making under conditions that would overwhelm most people. If she can handle that level of operational complexity while under potential enemy fire, I'm confident she can manage grocery shopping without your assistance or commentary about efficiency." Other Navy personnel began sharing their own experiences with Maria's leadership, technical expertise, and professional character, creating a comprehensive picture of military competence that made the civilian harassment appear even more petty, cruel, and fundamentally misguided. "She trained our entire division in electronic warfare countermeasures," Petty Officer Torres added, her voice carrying the respect that came from direct experience with Maria's teaching ability and technical knowledge. "Her expertise in radar operations and threat detection is recognized throughout the surface fleet. She's been requested for advanced training assignments and special operations that most sailors never have the opportunity to participate in." Dave Wilson, who had been deliberately creating physical obstacles and bumping Maria's wheelchair, looked increasingly uncomfortable as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake and the character of the person he'd been systematically harassing. "Look, we didn't mean anything personal by our behavior. We just thought she was taking too much time and disrupting the normal flow of weekend shopping." "You thought what, exactly?" Chief Martinez asked, with the kind of quiet intensity that made his question more powerful than shouting. "That using a wheelchair meant she was less intelligent? Less deserving of basic courtesy and respect? Less entitled to shop in the same stores that serve everyone else in this community?" The questions hung in the air without satisfactory answers because there were no good answers for harassment based on prejudice, assumption, and the kind of casual cruelty that revealed fundamental character flaws rather than momentary lapses in judgment. Maria finally spoke, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had once commanded combat information centers during fleet operations and crisis situations. "The mobility equipment doesn't change who I am, what I've accomplished, or what I continue to contribute to society. It doesn't make me less capable of shopping, working, learning, or participating in community life. What it does reveal is who has the character and integrity to treat others with basic human dignity regardless of their physical circumstances or the assumptions that might be made about their capabilities." She looked at each member of Kevin's group individually, using the direct eye contact and measured tone that had made her an effective military leader and instructor. "You saw my wheelchair and immediately decided I was an inconvenience to your personal routine. You never asked if I needed assistance, never considered that I might have a legitimate right to shop here during the same hours available to everyone else. Never thought that there might be more to my personal story than what you assumed based on my mobility equipment and your own limited experience with disability." Chapter 11. Resolution and Community Response. What happened next demonstrated the difference between military values and civilian behavior at both its worst and its best. The Navy personnel didn't demand dramatic apologies or threaten consequences for the harassment. They simply continued to model the kind of respectful, efficient, and mutually supportive behavior that represented their training and character. Chief Martinez organized an improved checkout process that allowed Maria to complete her shopping without further interference, while also demonstrating to store management and other customers how public spaces could function when people treated each other with consideration, respect, and the kind of practical helpfulness that made communities stronger rather than more divided. Sailors assisted other customers, maintained clear aisles, helped elderly shoppers reach high shelves, and generally demonstrated how shared public spaces could operate when people focused on mutual assistance rather than personal convenience at others' expense. Kevin's group, meanwhile, found themselves isolated and visibly uncomfortable as other shoppers began to understand what had been happening and how their own passive acceptance had enabled systematic harassment of a veteran whose service had protected their freedom to shop safely in civilian stores. As Maria finally completed her purchases with assistance from her Navy colleagues, Store manager Tom Bradley approached to offer both an apology for the harassment she had experienced and gratitude to the military personnel whose professional response had transformed a negative situation into a learning opportunity for staff and customers alike. "Ma'am," he said to Maria, "I want to apologize personally for what happened here today. This store is supposed to provide a welcoming environment for all customers, and we failed to protect you from harassment that should never have been tolerated." Maria accepted his apology with the grace that characterized her approach to civilian interactions. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Bradley. The important thing is learning from situations like this and implementing changes that prevent similar harassment of other customers who might not have the kind of support network that I was fortunate enough to access today." Chief Martinez offered the store management team his perspective on the situation and suggestions for staff training that could help prevent future incidents. "Mr. Bradley, Petty Officer Rodriguez isn't asking for special recognition because of her military service. She just wants the same courtesy and respect that every customer deserves. But her experience today demonstrates that passive policies aren't sufficient. Active intervention and leadership are required when harassment occurs." The conversation resulted in commitments to enhance staff training, clearer policies about customer harassment, and partnership with local veteran organizations to ensure that military personnel and veterans felt welcome and supported in civilian businesses throughout the community. But perhaps the most significant impact came from the civilian witnesses who had observed the contrast between harassment and respect, between military professionalism and civilian pettiness, between the values that divided communities and the principles that could bring them together. Chapter 12. Lasting Impact in Military Values. As the Navy personnel prepared to continue their weekend liberty with the satisfaction that came from supporting a shipmate and demonstrating military values in civilian settings, they made sure Maria had everything she needed for a successful conclusion to her shopping experience and ongoing support for future civilian challenges. Petty Officer Torres walked with Maria to her adapted vehicle, helping load groceries while sharing updates about former shipmates, current fleet operations, and the ongoing connections that made military service a lifelong commitment rather than simply a job that ended with discharge or retirement. "Rodriguez," she said as they completed the practical tasks, "you know you've got 200 sailors in this area who have your back, right? Not because you need protection, but because you're family, and that's what family does for each other." Maria smiled genuinely for the first time that afternoon. "I know, Torres, and I appreciate both the support and the reminder. But the real victory here isn't about me getting help. It's about showing these civilians what respect, dignity, and community responsibility look like when they're practiced rather than just talked about." Chief Martinez ensured Maria had current contact information for local veteran support services, disability advocacy organizations, and military family networks, while reminding her that Navy connections extended far beyond active duty service into civilian life and ongoing mutual support. "The uniform comes off," he observed, "but the commitment to honor, courage, and commitment doesn't end with discharge. Neither does the obligation to take care of each other and demonstrate military values in civilian communities." As the various groups of Navy personnel dispersed to continue their individual weekend plans, they left behind a grocery store that had been fundamentally changed by their presence. Staff had observed military courtesy, professionalism, and the kind of practical problem-solving that could transform negative situations into positive learning experiences. Customers had witnessed what genuine respect looked like in practice and how individual actions could either divide communities or bring them together around shared values. The civilian bullies had received education about assumptions, consequences, and the reality that their targets might have stories, experiences, and support networks that their limited perspective couldn't anticipate or understand. Most importantly, Maria had been reminded that her service record, professional expertise, and personal worth weren't diminished by civilian prejudice, mobility equipment, or the ignorant behavior of people whose own life experiences had been too limited to develop empathy, understanding, or basic human decency. The anchor tattoo on her forearm continued to represent her naval service, surface warfare expertise, and operational accomplishments. But now it also symbolized something equally important: the enduring connections between military personnel that transcended active duty status and created networks of mutual support, professional respect, and shared commitment to values that made both military service and civilian communities stronger, safer, and more honorable. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated poorly because of their disability, their appearance, or assumptions about their capabilities? Have you ever been in a situation where you wish someone had stood up for you when others were treating you unfairly? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire others to show more courage, kindness, and the kind of active intervention that transforms negative situations into positive change. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their circumstances, hit that subscribe button. Because the values that make our military strong, honor, courage, commitment, and taking care of each other, are the same values that can make our civilian communities better, stronger, and more welcoming to everyone who has served our country and continues to contribute to our shared society.